So I wanted to touch a little bit about the different versions of JavaScript. Specifically, there's this kind of funny cutoff date from 2015, and everything before that is kind of this older version of JavaScript, multiple versions, but really we'll talk about that in a bit. And everything past that is modern JavaScript. So the first thing I want to mention, and it'll kind of give some context. You'll notice these ES1, ES2, ES3. What we call JavaScript is actually really the colloquial name that we as developers give it. It was the original given, but it's not what we actually code in. So the ES actually stands for ECMAScript. And if you look up ECMAScript is basically the actual standardization of JavaScript. And it was just picked up by this company called ECMA International, hence the name. And if you wanted to look into it, you could find the actual standard of the language. And so this helped to kind of, and what all standards help to do is basically say, hey, this is JavaScript and how it should be written. And people weren't branching off and kind of doing their own thing with it. So that's why you see in this picture I found these different ES versions. So ES1, ES2, they're all referring to ECMAScript. Now anyways, JavaScript, or ECMAScript, and I'll just continue to call it JavaScript from now on, like I said, was invented in the 90s, and really, even though it was getting developed on and became better, it was kind of forgotten about until it was rediscovered in the early 2000s with ES3. And so ES3 was the standard that kind of built, not crazy things on the web, but if you think about the early 2000s, we started to see some rather cool websites. MySpace came out, Facebook came out, and they're not built totally on JavaScript, but the web started to become a more dynamic place once JavaScript was rediscovered. Dynamic websites were being made, and so ES3 was picked up and ran with. Now, ECMAScript, or ECMA International, tried to develop new versions of ECMAScript after that, but what happened was, as JavaScript became more popular in the 2000s, you might remember that we have these things called browsers that have to run JavaScript. And if you try to update a version of JavaScript, well, the browser would, by necessity, have to also update. And that was a bit hard for old browsers like Internet Explorer, old versions of Firefox. And so what happened basically was it really didn't get updated. JavaScript kind of remained the same for a long time until a new version called ES5 came out in 2009. And so if you think about 2009, this is around the time when Google Chrome was starting to come out. It was probably a little earlier in 2009, and browsers were starting to automatically update and starting to modernize with great speed, and people didn't have to download new versions of browsers. So when you upgraded your JavaScript, you weren't necessarily losing your customers because they didn't have browsers that could run your JavaScript. So ES5 was the standard when I learned JavaScript. And finally, we come to 2015 where ES6 came out, and ES6 was basically a really modern revamping of JavaScript. A lot of new features were added, different keywords, and it's the last really intensive major version of JavaScript that will likely ever come out, because ECMA has since put in a process where JavaScript will have small updates every year, and so that makes it easier for browsers to keep up and so forth. So I will specify when we are learning ES 2015 stuff, and I think it's so the textbook I was given, by the way, was an older version, and so talked about ES5 and previous stuff. However, I would think it would be a disservice to you, because if you ever go to a programming shop, more than likely people will be coding in ES 2015 plus. They might not be using, the latest, greatest version of JavaScript, but they're going to be using modern JavaScript. So that's what we'll be learning in this class. I'll specify when something is modern JavaScript or when it's kind of previous JavaScript. And so that is important to know, that there is this distinct difference. Hint, hint. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next video.